All right. I guess we'll get started here. Welcome to another Common Lisp study group. My apologies for last week. I ended up feeling a little bit under the weather. 1 second. Apparently my mic is distorted. Let me see if I could fix that. Let me see here. For those of you who are actually on the live stream, can you guys hear me well enough? Like, is there any distortions when I talk?
I hear you fine.
Okay.
Clear.
So today on the Common Lisp Study Group, we're going to be talking about web frameworks. We're going to start getting into our introduction into, doing just general web development inside Common Lisp. Web development in Common Lisp has had a very long history, many of which most people are probably familiar with when you start hearing some of the successful web application companies around there, like ITA, who developed their reservation system using Common Lisp, as well as even as early as in the early days of the web, Yahoo Web Stores, the one that Paul Graham actually created, leveraged Common Lisp to actually go and create shopping carts and so forth. So web development inside the language has a very, very tailored, very rich history, and many different approaches ended up being taken. As a result, what ended up happening is you had kind of a plethora of different kinds of web frameworks available to you to create anything from, microservice style web services to full-blown Rails style web applications. Today, we're going to be discussing one particular one. It's part of a series of different web frameworks written by the same author, Eitaro Fukamachi. He developed I guess you could say, a middleware on top of a Huntington and different other web service called Clack. And on top of that, he ended up creating a series of different web application frameworks. One specifically that we're going to be looking at today is ningle. Now, you might be wondering, well, where does ningle fit into kind of the spectrum that I was speaking of? For those of you who are familiar with Sinatra or even in Python Flask, ningle kind of fits into that kind of family, in that it just gives you just enough to create web services with proper HTTP handling that can hook up to Lisp functions normally. And it gives you the ability to also address some things like adding special header columns and adding special headers inside your actual HTTP header information that can be handled outside the client. This is particularly useful if you're ending up writing web services inside, for example, AWS or even some of the more public clouds, where they often require inside the HTTP header information certain types of keys that are used for authentication and even authorization of particular types of services. So I have a basic project created here using CL project that I want to first go through specifically to discuss some of the dependencies that I recognized when I was kind of starting to play with this. And this has been a kind of a recent development, particularly because there are I've recognized that there are probably ways for me to actually run this kind of application, has a Lambda inside AWS Lambda. And that's going to be a discussion for a future episode. But I wanted to kind of mention it here, that's kind of the motivations that I had when I started playing around with this, and I wanted to present to you guys some of my findings. To start with, ningle kind of depends on QTools. I didn't realize that this was the case. There is some stuff that ningle uses in the background that leverages the Qt library. So when you start setting up your projects, one thing you may want to make sure that you have is the Q2 library as being a dependency. So when we go and load this guy, you'll see quickly that it will go through and download everything, including QTools, and set it up so that we'll be able to actually write some code. In addition, Ningle behind the scenes also leverages some other lower level but fairly well written HTTP libraries from ED Whites like Drachma and HTTP client. So there's stuff here that you'll see that is just pulling into the Lisp image, has additional dependencies that it will then leverage for things like, say, security handling, SSL certificate like verification. It uses Ironclad behind the scenes for that, and other things. So I thought I actually compiled this earlier on, but my apologies. It's just taking just a minute for it to load. And an additional thing that I want to also bring up, just because it's showing here, is for those of you who are familiar with Clack, apparently Clack version 2 is its architecture is changing a little bit to make it more modular, and you'll see lack request and lack response here. It's along the lines. Those are actually modules from the Clack framework that are being refactored out and stabilized. I don't know exactly what some of those specifics are in terms of the refactorings. I'm going through that right now. When I find out some of that stuff, I'll let you know. So let's go ahead and bring up a very simple thing here. Let me just pull up, thought I had this open, but let's go ahead and, sorry, source main.lisp. Okay. So for those of you who are familiar with Flask and even Sinatra, a lot of this stuff that I'm going to be showing you is going to be probably fairly familiar. To make a simple route, we must first create an instance of our application. This is kind of the same as, I think if I remember correctly, Flask apps. In order for you to actually create it, you have to create an instance of a Flask app before you can actually start the actual application. This is the same idea. So we'll make a parameter, let's just say a global parameter for now, that simply is an instance of our application. Okay, applications in Ningle are instances of Ningle app. These are where you would collect different types of services. So if you want to run, say, for example, different web services that are different instances of Ningle apps, you just need to make sure you encapsulate those routes within that specific instance, and then you can go ahead and start them up on you can register them in Clack and then have them start up on 8080 or whatever customized port that you'd want to use. Now that we actually have an app, we need to add some routes to it. This is pretty easy by using Ningle route. Again, this is not new for some folks. What might be new for folks is especially those who may have used in the past, Caveman or Caveman 2. I noticed, at least in the Common Lisp documentation for Ningle specifically, that he does not leverage CL annot. So those of you who want to use the annotations that are in other web frameworks, Ningle does not have that. It uses Lispy style syntax, which means it'll do the standard function object sort of message send to the particular object instance for registering stuff. Now, you might notice in my mini buffer, which I hope folks can actually see, that there are several types of arguments here, like regular expressions, identifiers, the methods. The default method, if you don't specify anything, is that it'll assume the route is going to be an HTTP GET. but of course, as with everything, it does support all the standard CRUD operations, including, surprisingly, didn't realize it also included this, the options header as well as the head header. So for right now, we're just going to go ahead and I'm going to show the syntax. I'm going to go ahead and specify get explicitly here, although it's already the default. In addition, I will later on show you some stuff that about parameter handling and how parameters are passed in just a little bit. But right now, in this simple example, we are just showing folks how the route will get set up inside the ningle app instance that I just created here. So this is now just a simple setup expander. Most folks will probably see the syntax in a lot of other libraries. This is all you really need to do. You can, once you actually have that route, you can actually start up the application and oops. Oh, that's right. I forgot to add inside my project clack. Give me just 1 minute here. Because I need that to actually start the web service itself. While this is working, I'm also going to create a split window here so I can actually open up a shell. While this is compiling, I'm going to mention that, as with everything that I'm showing here, ningle is available on quicklisp. You don't have to actually do anything additional. I did not download this into my local projects and then load it up. There are libraries out there that that you might be leveraging that may not be available for quicklisp. I haven't seen any recently, but just in case, if you want to use quicklisp and there's some sort of third-party common Lisp library that you want to use for handling, again, just download it into your local project directly in your quicklisp distribution directory, and then you can just use quicklisp as is, and it will treat that as a source registry and will upload it accordingly. So now that I have clack loaded into my Lisp image, I can go ahead and compile this guy. This guy is now loaded by default, as you noticed here in my Lisp REPL. I did not specify a port here, so the default is 5000. For folks who aren't familiar with clack, clack does allow you to, has a keyword argument specified both the address and the port. Here, the default is localhost or 127.0.0.1. You can also do 0.0.0.0 if you want the underlying host IP to be available. This is particularly useful, especially when you start getting ready to publish these guys as actual services. For folks who have done other web services in the past with other frameworks in other languages, this shouldn't be new to you. This is probably just familiar, but I'm just mentioning it ahead of time. Now that we have our web service running, you can use curl. I'm just using curl here, or you can open up a web browser and you can actually see that once we loaded it, and it was really quick. I've noticed. Yeah, that's right. The shell may not actually spit that out. Let me see. Yeah. Okay, I see what the problem is. Emacs's shell is not a lot. Dumping the output with Zshell. I recently updated to the new Mac OS X, and I'm still getting used to Zshell. Bash used to do this in the past. Let me see if I can actually switch over to my entire desktop here. Just give me a second. Let's see here. Let's get rid of those. And let me switch over to entire screen. And let's go over to here. So just to show you guys how this looks like, if you do localhost 5000, you'll see that it will present welcome to Ningle. Now, ignore the special character there. That sometimes happens in Zshell, I noticed. I don't know why when I'm playing around with curl, but that's not actually what is actually shown. I mean, just to give you like a heads up here, if I do this on the browser, here, you'll see that welcome to Ningle. This running web server gives you some interesting options. This is again kind of like how a lot of newer web frameworks do their, sorry, my apologies, this sometimes happens. A lot of newer web frameworks do their interactive development. You can now change this value, and all you do is the return value of the actual service. All you do is just recompile. You'll notice that it's getting redefined here, and it has been already redeployed. So when you do a refresh, you will already get, you know, the value of the new service. This gives you, you know, that kind of interactive style development that, you know, we all become kind of accustomed to when we're running our Lisp applications. Are there any questions so far?
So I can't see your screen anymore. I don't know if anyone else is having issues. Are you having connectivity issues?
Yeah, me either.
Okay.
You're not able to see my screen?
No, not since for I guess 1 minute or so.
Can you, let me try this again. Can you see it now? How's that?
It's not saying connectivity issues, but I'm seeing a blank screen. I'm just seeing the gray background.
Are you seeing you're not, are you seeing at least the web browser?
No.
Okay. Let me switch over to Emacs and see if that works. Because earlier when I had Emacs up, I'm assuming that you guys had some issue. Yeah, you guys were fine.
Yeah, I think when you switch there, that's kind of when it went away.
Okay. Give me a second here. How's that?
Now I see the screen. Yeah.
Okay. I was trying to show some of the command line things, but Emacs, for some reason, with Zshell, not so much with Bash. I could try this with Bash. Let me see if I could do this. But with Zshell, I was having some trouble, at least with my SpaceMax configuration, where it was giving me an issue with actually showing the output from curl. So let me see if I could switch over to Bash. Okay. And let me see if I could go and do this. Yeah, this is, I thought. This is, that is a total Zshell problem. Okay. So I'm going to use Bash for now. I will, For folks who are watching this, if you guys know anybody at Apple, just tell them that, oh, my Zshell for some reason doesn't work with Emacs. So I don't understand why, but it doesn't work completely. Anyway, other than the technical difficulties, did the basic idea make sense on what I was saying earlier? I'm assuming so, just because a lot of this stuff is probably just review for most of the folks that are on the call. But to show another example, I'm going to go ahead and show you parameters that are coming in. There are several ways to deal with parameters. Let's say that we're making a dummy post call, and so of course we need to make sure that we specify the post inside our route. This can take in a normal function or an anonymous function, but the handlers behind the scenes will pass in a param object, and this is actually an associative list. So you might just see and this will keep track of specifically the key value pairs, like any sort of associative list. So if you wanted to grab something, you could just simply use the assoc function call to actually grab it. Of course, what's going to be returned is going to be a list. So you need to do kidder. So let's say that we pass in these params, and hopefully this will work, because I do not have a do I have an authorize function here somewhere? No, I don't. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and do this. Let's say that if we do and assoc username, and let's say params, okay, and then test string equals. Let me just see if this will work. And assoc password. Yeah. We need to also do this kidder, because this is going to be a list that gets returned. Kidder. And just do this to make things easier. Params test string equal. Okay. Now we'll just say print. We can just say authorize. Otherwise, we will say not authorized. All right. And let's see here now. Hopefully this will work. So for folks, what I'm trying to do is I'm just simply using curl again here to pass in the data. Let's see here now. We do see data username equals. And this may not actually work because of the fact that I do not have any sort of authorization utilities. I'm just going to go ahead and print this guy out instead for the time being. Print out params, just to show you guys how this works. Okay. And all right, I forgot to data username equals username. Okay. HTTP colons localhost. And Too few elements in. Okay, 1 second. Try this again. Oh, I'm an idiot. I can't do it this way. I need to do like this. Sorry, folks. Just I am messing up the syntax here to pass in the data over to the post method, and just make sure I'm not doing something wrong here. It should have worked, but for some reason, still saying destructuring file. Too few elements in test. That shouldn't be. That's fine. Oops. I thought that that's correct. Okay. I'm just going to move on here just because for some reason, I know the JSON example that I'll come up with actually works, but I have to add a couple of things on top of this. For some reason, my my curl foo is pretty bad. And I thought I had this correct when I tried it earlier, but that was just probably an anomaly. This shouldn't work. Oh, wait. Let me do something here. Let me try one more time. This might be it. Too few arguments to the destructuring bind. Let's see what happens. Is S.
I'll do a lot of web development, but do you need to set like a content type or something?
No, you shouldn't have to, but in this case, because the default is already there, but we could try. That might certainly try some stuff.
And the example I saw for like at least the content type, what is the application JSON? I think that first one looked like the right syntax with the single quotes and then the associated list.
Yeah, I think the example that I gave will work with a route that actually accepts content type JSON, but I'm trying to just show text. Dang it! Is it just text /plain?
All right.
Command not. Oh, wait, did I mess up something here? Oh, yeah, that. Okay, let me rewrite this entire thing here. Oh, dash post header type text / plain. Sorry, got to do this over again. Type data. And okay, there seems to be a little technical syntax difficulty. I'll post this example later on. Let's just move on to the next thing that I was going to show you. Okay, so ningle also provides the ability to actually put, just like we were doing earlier with parameters, although we're having some technical difficulties, another way of doing this, and this actually I know works very well, is we can actually specify REST style routes. So let's say, for example, you might want to, like, and this is going to be RPC style. I know you shouldn't be handling this. I'm not for the sake of brevity and for example's sake, I am not trying to be a purist here in this example, but let's just say that we decide, you know what, we're going to make an RPC style REST call that adds 2 numbers, okay? So we call the first one param1 and param2, all right? Method is still going to be a get instead of a post. Again, we don't have to necessarily specify it, but for completeness sake, let's go ahead and specify that the method is a get. This will then be passed into, again, a function that will take the parameters. Now, what's nice about this is you could clearly see just how quickly it is possible to actually just set up these little routes. And again, as I said before, getter ASOC, you need to specify the parameters. In this case here, I'm just going to mention param1 and param2 are now become keyword parameters inside the associative list. Whereas before, you may have noticed that I was trying to grab them using strings. Here, I'm actually using keywords to actually grab them from the parameters object itself. So here we got, and let me just do this to make things a little bit more simpler for ourselves, which is cut. Let's make this into a left block. A. Paste that, and let's do B being our parameter 2. And get AB plus AB. Very simple, very dumb, but we'll illustrate the point. If we go here into our shell and then we do curl HTTP localhost 5000, and then we do add 1, 2, you will notice, oh wait, what is it saying? Oh, my apologies. That's my mistake. This is caused by the fact that their returned has strings here, not actually has the integers, and we're trying to add 2 strings. what you have to do is actually call parse integer on each of these. You don't have to do this all the time, but this is something that if you're trying to grab stuff has integers from the REST call, this is something that you have to do. So if you do this and you call it, you'll notice that we get 1 + 2 = 3. Again, this change, this, you know, you can use this for anything. It doesn't cache any of these return values because we didn't actually specify that. In addition to actually named parameters, and this is kind of something interesting that I noticed in the ningle documentation the other day. You can actually do what are called wildcard parameters in route patterns. I don't know in what situations you may want to do this. It might be, say, for example, if you want to like maybe pass in different types of an object, like say UUIDs or strings are both valid. So you can want to specify different routes for the different types. What you could do is write a single route, like say the following, where let's say we're trying to grab two stuff, and this is straight up from the documentation. We can go through this a little bit. You can actually write a route like this that takes two stars. These are wildcard parameters. And if you want to retrieve from them, you can just do what's called a splat. And what that does is it will return you a list of all the parameters that are available in that section. So let's see what happens when you do this. Okay. So now, if we do say to world, you'll see what gets returned is unsupported version in HTTP response. What? Hold on 1 second. That should have actually worked. Did I mess up something here? Let me see if I need this even. That's interesting. That did not happen to me earlier on Linux. Okay, this tells me that I should be doing some of this more interesting stuff on Linux because on Mac, for some reason, it's giving me just a couple of oddities that I didn't see when I was running this on my Linux box earlier. That's fine. I will continue talking about the other stuff that's available here. Let's say that you want to write, and folks, I will post this online. I'm telling you, if you guys are running this on Linux, this works fine. For some reason, Mac's giving me a few oddities, but I think it's probably just a configuration that I need to go and deal with. My apologies for not having this a little bit more thorough of a test when I was running this earlier, but I tried a couple of the examples when I was preparing for this talk earlier. In addition to specifying, wildcards or even named parameters, we have another route, which I hope will work, which is the ability to pass in regular expressions into our routes. So if you wanted to, say, use a regular expression to split all the words up and grab specifically one word out of this and say that this is a regex. Here, you may notice in my arguments, in the keyword arguments, regex is one of the arguments. You can actually say that this is true, saying that this is going to be a regular expression. Go ahead and call this and then match it up. What you end up getting is a associative list with what's called a captures object. A captures keyword. And that will actually then be used to, it will hold the actual objects that are associated with that particular matching. So if you had, say, a UUID or whatever, and you want to use a regular expression to handle that, you could certainly do so. So to show you this, now these are, what I'm trying to show you is and illustrate is ningle has some opinions on certain types of routes that it provides, but there are other things that you can configure to as well. So if you notice here, what happened is when we go through this code, it matches. Sorry, when we go through this code, we turned on regular expressions, which means this route automatically gets compiled into a regular expression using CLPPCRE behind the scenes, if I'm not mistaken. When the request actually comes in, it creates this this associative list, which holds this captures keyword parameter that you could then leverage to actually get the return values. Now, I know for some folks coming from other things, you might be wondering why we're constantly cattering. Associative list, you may have for a given keyword, one or more values that are returned in the associative list. So it always returns a list. It doesn't try to figure out whether or not something is a list of values or not. It'll always try to make it a list of one. So as a result, you're going to almost always have to get the cutter of the console that's returned by the assoc function to actually get the actual value that you want. Here, in this particular case, the return value is a list. Okay, it's giving you the console. Associate will give you the console. Cutter will give you the rest of the list, and then the first value is going to be the actual value that you're going to be using. Are there questions? Okay. In some web services and in some services where you're deploying to, as I mentioned earlier, there might be specialty headers that you may need to add to your actual HTTP header in order for the service to be recognized or authorized by the external third-party service that you're leveraging in order to do some operation. So if you're using a curl request, you may have to actually explicitly, as you saw what I was doing earlier, specify the -- header option and give your specialty headers. This may be stuff, anything from adding the content type information, as you saw me do earlier, to some specialty things like keys for doing some form of stateful caching on the server side during the course of a particular session. Ningle provides that through what he calls conditions. So an example of this is if you're trying to design a service that only accepts, say, content type JSON. Okay, so you could create a route here that is, let's say, a test route that accepts only application/JSON, and this itself will then, return a parameters object, which you can certainly, let's say, return back. Okay. Now notice I'm not actually saying I'm producing anything in the header information, although I think I may have to at some point add that. That's actually certainly a best practice. But for the sake of example, this route here will take in a JSON and it will just, echo the JSON back. So when we try to do this, again, this is a GET request. I'm not showing the other options for the time being. You could actually, let me do this. I'm going to go ahead and make this into a post just because gets are idempotent. Okay. Let's see, post. header content type JSON data test, and let's see. You may have noticed that you're not actually getting anything returned by this. This is honestly kind of odd. Let me see something here. This should have actually returned the post body, but for some reason it is returning. Let me see this. Okay. I'm just gonna do all this in one line. This might be my problem. Okay. So let's see here. Let me see if I need to do this. ASOC data params. Nope. It's still just ignoring that. Okay. I'm just gonna see if okay. I'm gonna try this again because it looks like Bash is just giving me trouble inside Emacs. I'm gonna try and switch over to use -f with the params. Hey, Mike Gargano, could you explain that in the curl? Are you talking about in the post request earlier that I showed you? I did. Okay, for the login example, let me see something here. Oh, wait. I don't think I need this then. Okay, that didn't work. I will. We could try that again in a little bit. There is one thing that I wanted to see, which is, let me see if I can get this working. Dash B. Let me see if this changes if I do this. No, actually, this should work, but this is invalid. Okay. Let me see what happens here. Oh, not that. My test example. It's being dumped on, but let's see here. Print. I'm gonna restart my Lisp. For some reason, it's not registering my post request. So, reload our ningle intro, and it's gonna take a few seconds here. All right. Okay, this is just not the way I expected to. Let's see. Let's see if this works. Nope. Okay. That is, I'm going to go ahead and move on to this last thing that I was going to show you, because I think this also will work if I just, for some reason, the post syntax here in the documentation doesn't, in my notes, don't seem to match with what I was seeing on Linux. So I'm going to have to do some digging later on. So,
is there a chance you need to like update curl or like this in this bash environment?
It shouldn't be the case, but that's certainly an option I could do. I'll go ahead and just because let's see. Let me try updating curl in the background while I continue explaining this one other thing, which since we're using gets here, this is not a big deal. In addition to in addition to what I was showing you earlier with this accept and adding stuff to the adding to the header information like accept, content header, content type, so forth, you can specify your own custom headers through what he calls requirements. These are essentially conditions that you can add to your HTTP request that if they provide it, then it will work. Otherwise, the certain functions will get called. Otherwise, it will it'll just be ignored. These routes will not be called. So, like in this example that I saw earlier that I was going to try with you guys, he specifies a requirement that if you in the header information say that a value is that you specify something to the probability, and for some random value, if it's less than or equal to this value that you passed in, it will go ahead and it will do some sort of action. This might be useful for certain types of routes that you are writing for that get dispatched based on the random value that you provide. So this is like kind of like a guessing game that he created. So he has two routes here. Well, two handlers for the same route. One is win a car with probability 10, and win a car without any probability provided. So you can here. Now, for folks who haven't actually touched Common Lisp here, who have just joined us, just to give you a review, declare ignore params basically is telling the Lisp image that I know that this is being unused right now, but I am matching the signature that is required by the specific API call. So this will allow you to actually write code that might be particularly nasty, but can adhere to a specific API interface. Here's another route here that we need to obviously write, which is to win a car without, and this is actually, let me just go ahead and change this because this is invalid syntax. Oh, shoot, 2. Okay. This is all right. So let's see here. Curl header probability. Let's say 10 equals 10. Okay. And let's see. 5,000. Sorry, you lost. But if you see, if I do like say 100, this is like kind of a guessing game. If we do, let me just say, let's cut this to 50. Okay. Oops, we need to rerun. Okay. Oh. 1 second. Wow. It is not even calling that guy right now. Let's see here. This should actually get handled. Okay. I see. Let me see if I do this as is. Sorry you lost. Sorry you lost. Yes, of course I lost because I haven't specified the probability. Actually, there's an easier way of showing you guys this. Just make sure I give you guys the right thing here. Gee.
Is there any way that that second route is it's a catch-all that's overriding?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. So I may have to actually do this, which is, let me just do this. Let me go here and change this. Let's comment this guy out. Restart my Lisp image, which tends to happen. This is kind of how you tend to debug code. Let's see here. Probability 10. Let's see. There we go. That's right. Since you don't even have to specify it here in this case, because of the fact that we've already specified the default probability here. So here, what's happening is the route's coming in, it's automatically recognizing this probability here, and then it's actually going into this route. But if we go ahead and do something like this, this is kind of a catch-all that should also work, but for some reason, it'll always go down to that. Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay. There are other things inside Ningle that I wanted to mention that you could leverage that I'll bring up just briefly here. Well, a lot of them is related to its interactivity, its interaction and its coupling with the LAC library that, again, Mr. Fukumachi created as part of the CLAC refactoring that he's doing currently. One of the things is request and response header types. Coming from, say, Sinatra or even Flask, you might leverage, controllers in those libraries to like constrain the certain types of responses that you'll be generating, or the certain types of requests that you'll be generating. You can you leverage the LAC to actually do this through Ningle, for Ningle, using the following syntax. And I'm going to mention this really briefly here, primarily because I have not myself been have not experimented here, and I don't know to what effect this will actually function given the current technical difficulties I've been having with this library on Mac. I will say that if you really want to explore it, actually, I'll take this back. If you really want to explore some of these advanced features, the documentation is actually really nice for this. For folks who are doing session management through Ningle as well, Ningle is a very, like I said, lightweight framework. It doesn't handle all that. Same thing with like Flask and other libraries and other languages. It follows the same kind of modular approach. You need to specify that information by using the middleware portion of LAC. At some point, I will bring up this discussion of using some of this stuff as we start, going more and more into this. I just wanted to briefly mention it here so that for folks who want to go ahead and try some of this out, they can certainly do so. Are there questions? My apologies ahead of time for this, for some of the difficulties I've had in this demo. When I tried this, like I said the other day on my Linux box, it seemed to be working, and I thought when I ran the same code the other day, it was working on my Mac, but I also recently upgraded my Mac, so I'm not entirely sure if I messed up my Lisp environment in that process. So I have to do some debugging on this before I can give you guys a better discussion on it. With that, are there questions or comments? General questions in general. Ooh, hold on. There is one from Michael. When you return the list from lambdas to get the pointed, or do you need those formats that aren't moving? I'm not sure I understand the question, but Michael, but if I get you, you're asking, do yes. When you return the list, they should actually get returned in the response object that's being returned by the function, that is the route handler. So it should take that, and since you didn't actually specify like the response content type, okay, it should all be text plain inside the response header, and it should just take the output and echo it out. So essentially, I was trying to create a bunch of echo services for the different HTTP methods. But for some reason, that didn't come out as planned. Again, this certainly could be related to something on my part and missing something specific inside from reading the documentation on how to handle the posts and the puts. But I didn't see anything special when I originally read the documentation on having to add some of that, and it certainly works when you run it on Linux. So that's something that that turned out to be a particular interesting thing. Like the results are different depending upon where the Lisp image is running itself. And more importantly, I think I'm running an older version of SBCL on Linux than I am on Windows, which means I have to kind of update that on Mac, which means I have to kind of update that so I can do an apples to apples comparison. Are there other questions? So I know that there are a couple newcomers to our study group. Welcome. I'd like to bring up a couple of things since you're just joining us. One is the Atlanta Functional Programming YouTube channel that contains all of our episodes in the past that's gone through Practical Common Lisp, how to set up quicklisp, how to set up an introduction to ASDF, an introduction to how to actually create a distribution, custom distribution, and so forth. and even our discussion into class, using it for object-oriented programming. We're now kind of looking for topics for discussion, ideas that you'd like us to present and go through. Certainly, please post them on Mattermost using the CL study group channel. I spend almost a lot of my time there. This is from the Lisp study group community that Mr. Michael Fiano created. For more information, go to chat.lisp.cl, and that will give you what you need in order to actually hook into the Mattermost server. On top of that, we're available on Freenode and Discord as well. But as you go through and learning the language, if there are particular topics that you want us to cover, certainly we will go through them. But I encourage you to go back to look at our earlier episodes. We may have covered something that you wanted to look into already. There's one more thing. I'll just go check our YouTube stream here. Okay. Okay. Are there any questions from the live stream?
Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Judd. I didn't even realize you were here. I'm gonna so we're gonna continue this web development stuff for the next couple of weeks. Just primarily because I'm trying to get more and more into some of the stuff with especially with writing web services in Common Lisp through AWS Lambda. I will post some of these examples for ningle later today, but I'm going to probably clean them up and make sure that everything kind of works on both Mac, Linux, and hopefully Windows as well. But we'll see, time permitting. Next week, I will try and cover Caveman 2, not Caveman. That's another Fukamachi web framework. And if there isn't anything else, I will see you guys next week.
Yeah, I mean that sounds good. Thanks for doing this.
No problem. I will talk to you guys later.